on the computer. Okay, I've hit record, so now we're all famous. And I am going to continue to admit people, but Paul, I would love to get us started. And first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for such a great interest in the white salmon and Paul Fortino's story about the white salmon. This is the most folks we've ever had on a lunch and learn. And so I'm excited about that, and honest to Pete, a little nervous because, you know, technology is interesting, right? So let's all just hope this goes smoothly and well, and we all retain our Wi-Fi connectivity. I'm going to mute all now, and Paul, I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself. And ladies and gentlemen, just wanted to introduce Paul Fortino. He is a wonderful river steward who lives right on the White Salmon River, and he has also been a longtime Native Fish Society supporter and is currently the chair of our board of directors. So without further ado, I'm going to mute us all, and Paul, I'm going to invite you to unmute. And folks, if you have questions during Paul's talk, please put them in the chat and I will record them and we can ask them when he's done.
I believe I'm unmuted. Is there anybody that can't hear me? Okay. Well, I want to. Am I unmuted now? All right. I love the electronic marvels. I never even imagined anything like Zoom a year ago. Thanks for showing up. The White Salmon River is a special friend of mine. I've lived on it now for 6 years, and it is my pleasure to talk about it. I am not a scientist, so in technical knowledge, there are an awful lot of people on this call that know more about it than I do from a scientific perspective, but there's no one on this call who loves it more. The White Salmon River arises on Mount Adams in Washington State and is theoretically 45 miles long. The mouth of the river is directly across from Hood River, Oregon. There are realistically only 20 miles of river because there are so much braiding of small rivulets at the first 20 miles. And about 20 miles up, there is an impassable falls, so that fish activity, of which we're interested, is limited to the lower 20 miles. According to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the White Salmon River is approximately 70% spring water year-round. The snow certainly provides the water, but it spends a lot of time in rock before expressing itself in small springs between 20 and 45 miles upstream from the mouth. The river is cold year-round. It's amazing when it's 100 degrees to see rafts go by with people in full dry suits, and they are not bothered at all by the heat because the water is so cold. That is a great asset. There was no passage on this river for about 100 years above milepost 2.2 from the mouth. There was something called the Condit Dam. It has been gone a decade now. If you'd like to see the thrilling pictures, you can probably go on YouTube and just look for Condit Dam removal. It was pretty impressive. PacifiCorp was its owner, and PacifiCorp has done a lot of restoration work in the old Northwestern Lake site. There are 5 tributaries, all of which provide spawning habitat: Mill Creek, Buck Creek, Spring Creek, Rattlesnake Creek, and Indian Creek. And Indian flows into Rattlesnake. There has never been a hatchery on the White Salmon River or its tributaries. The white salmon is a treasure. Why is it a treasure? From my perspective, and I believe the perspective of anyone interested in wild fish, there is but one Columbia Dam between the White Salmon and the Pacific Ocean, and that's Bonneville Dam, which has pretty darn good fish passage. There are native runs of steelhead and salmon that have begun to pick up where they left off a century ago. The Condit Dam was impassable. It was impossible too. The river is at a transition between the lush western habitat, the Washington and Oregon forest, and the hot and dry deserts of each of those states. Anadromous fish on their way up the Columbia enter its cooling water, even if they are headed upstream and not destined for further up the white salmon. Now, much of the river is in a forbidding canyon. It's certainly forbidding at my age, but it's forbidding at everybody's age in some places. It's designated as a wild and scenic river. It is also a designated gene bank and cold water refuge. After the dam was removed, as I said, Pacific Corps replanted the bed of what was Northwestern Lake. Now, what do we know and what don't we know? We know that there have been historic runs of tule salmon, coho salmon, and steelhead in the river up as high as Hewsum Falls for salmon and as high as BZ Falls for steelhead. We don't know much about the genetics of fish that are returning now, except anecdotally. We know that this is an important watershed for several endangered runs, but we really don't know that much about the returning fish, their origin, their numbers, etc. Part of the reason for this call is that we want to gather more information and we need volunteers to do that, and we'll get with you on that. There are several agencies that are very interested in the river. Most notably right now, at least in my experience, is the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Yakima Nation, the USGS. All have done some work, and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife seems really interested because this is a designated cold water refuge and gene bank. We know much more about the salmon in the river than we do about the steelhead, but that is not to say that we really know that much about any of the runs, except through the work that's been done up until now, partly by the Yakima Nation, partly by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and USGS. Now, what is happening now on the river? With the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Friends of the White Salmon River, and other agencies, including the Yakima Nation, we're in the process of conducting red surveys on 3 of the tributaries that are felt to be the most productive right now, or the easiest to do. By the way, none of them are easy, and you can talk to Michelle about that. Scale samples have been taken from the last 5 or so years, but they have been preserved and were not read so that we know the origin of fish, or were not read in great numbers. And so we are in the process right now of getting those already taken scale samples read. And that should tell us a lot about where the fish are coming from, whether they are strays, whether they are native fish in that river, etc. We're trying now to fund a pit log or a pit tag reader in the river. We would like ultimately to have a pit tag reader in every one of those tributaries, but that would cost us money we don't have at this point. We are trying to install a pit tag reader right as we speak. That work has been done with Washington Trout they made a good donation, and the Friends of the White Salmon River and the Native Fish Society have supported this financially. In the spring of 2021, in fact, going on right now, we have been doing red counts. And anyone that has done them, myself excluded, because 75-year-old guys shouldn't be doing red counts in these streams. I'm not sure I could do a red count in any stream, but right now we're doing red counts on 3 of the streams, on Buck Creek, Mill Creek, and Spring Creek. And that is mainly to see what the population of coho salmon look like. In the spring, we're going to be doing red counts on those same creeks, but we will be looking for red counts of winter steelhead. The river has had down near the mouth a screw trap for a number of years, and the screw trap has been the source of these scale samples I've been telling you about. And we haven't had anybody operate the screw trap in 2020 because of COVID, but we're going to be hopefully running the screw trap again. And that's something I have volunteered to help out on because it's a little bit more my speed at my age. You know, the removal of the Condit Dam provided us with a pretty much unique opportunity to have a cold water river that had never had a hatchery on it, that has reasonably good access to the Pacific Ocean and vice versa, with essentially a clean slate as far as the technical information goes, to really do our thing in supporting wild native fish and the habitats that support them. As I mentioned, the white salmon is in many places at the bottom of a pretty forbidding canyon. And that has really slowed development on the river so that there is a tremendous amount of pristine habitat that would be perfect, I believe, for returning anadromous fish and provides us with a really great laboratory. What do we need? We need your help. Now I'm going to turn this back over to Jay Michelle for questions and answers, but also to try to elicit some folks to help us with the red counts, possibly with the assistance at the screw trap, and indeed to help make these almost inaccessible tributaries a little more accessible so that we can actually do the red counts with more accuracy. Jay Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you now. If you want anything more, just let me know. I'll mute my microphone.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And don't mute your microphone too quickly because we do have some questions for you from our lovely audience. So one of somebody asked, it says, could you tell us more about Northwestern Lake after the dam removal? How did the habitat respond? And was there a lot of silt, etc.?
There were thousands of tons of silt that went down the river. Any of you that are familiar with the river will know that the Native Americans had a boat launch down near the mouth that was just totally wiped out. When you see, if you go Google it, you will see how much stuff was backed up in Northwestern Lake. Northwestern Lake was a relatively small lake, but it was very, very deep. And the restoration that has been done has mainly been in replanting of grasses, trees, and shrubs. It did affect the people who lived on Northwestern Lake. At least initially, the biggest effect was that it dropped the water table to where their wells didn't work, and that presented a real problem for Pacific Corp. I think that those problems are taken care of now. Is that good enough? You want any more on that one, Michelle?
No, that sounds just fine. Paul, you took me on a tour for my first time on the White Salmon last summer, and you had showed me along where the lake used to be. You had shown me there were all these houses. Are they still? They're inhabited still, correct? But that used to be lakefront.
They used to be lakefront houses. Now they are canyon houses with a view of the river in most cases.
Okay.
But it has really gone down. And like I say, it was a very deep lake, and now it's a very deep river.
Very good. Very good. Well, real briefly, I'm going to touch on, and please, any of you that have questions, please enter them in the chat and I will get them to Paul. But quickly, just wanted to let you know that we are searching for more volunteers to help with lots of different projects. The kind of neat thing for me around this White Salmon project is that I was introduced to Friends of the White Salmon, and also Joe Zent, who's the fish bio for the Yakima tribe, and we had conversations and really sort of built a program by which we can assist the tribe and WDFW getting some of the data that they need during times where we don't have a lot of person power handy, and it's COVID. And just FYI, Paul is not being at all exaggeratory when he talks about how difficult the red counts are, but I want to share with you that I've done them and I'm still sore, but it's excellent workout and it's really good during COVID activity. So just FYI, it's a good way to keep our muscles going, and it's a great way to help out WDFW and Friends of the White Salmon in terms of just caretaking that river and ensuring that everyone gets the data that we need. The cool thing about this project is that we're pulling volunteers from both Oregon and Washington. So just like the Columbia is co-managed between Washington and Oregon, Native Fish Society has me on the Washington side and our newest staff person, Liz, on the Oregon side. And we will be co-managing our volunteers, making sure that you're well taken care of and have the resources you need to help us with projects on the White Salmon and others. We do have some waders for loan that Patagonia donated to Native Fish Society. So if your pristine Sims waders are a concern, and by the way, there's a lot of black gray bushes, we do have waders that you can wear during the red counts. WDFW, and especially Lisa, I will highlight, has been super helpful in terms of getting us the equipment and the training materials that we needed to ensure that we're following the protocols to the letter. And I will mention that protocols for our red counts here in Washington are very similar to the ones in Oregon. So if you have experience in Oregon but not Washington, please don't let that deter you. We can work with you. So that's a plug for, hey, talk to me more about wanting to help out with this and other projects. And Paul, there's a question here that I see. Okay, this is the question. I'm going to read it aloud. It says, can someone explain how this river is a wild gene bank when it was extirpated? Oh, I'm not going to understand this question very well. John, do you want to unmute yourself and ask this question for us? I don't want to misread it. So John S.E.J. wrote the question.
Oh, it's Elliot Johnson.
Can you?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that. Yeah, the question is, sorry, misspelled from.
It's okay.
The river has been extirpated by all salmon and steelhead runs for over 100 years. And the recolonization that's been happening for the last 10 years, those fish presumably are not originated. They've not originated from this river to start with. Basically, I'm getting to, is there been any genetic analysis to support the statements of this being a wild gene bank when it seems like it's a bunch of strays from elsewhere?
Let me take a shot at that. The thought that has been expressed to me was that, especially as to steelhead, there were fish trapped above the Condit Dam. As you know, a rainbow and a steelhead are the same fish, and they express themselves the same way, but that when the dam went out, the fish that were trapped above the dam, some of them reverted to being steelhead. There were also steelhead and salmon in the lower 2 miles of the river before the Condit, or after, while the Condit Dam was there. And it was known during all that time to be a very good fishing river in those lower couple of miles for both salmon and steelhead. I gave Jay Michelle a book that I had, which talked about historic runs of fish in Washington. And historically, even with the Condit Dam in place, the White Salmon River was in the top 5 or 6 steelhead rivers in the state of Oregon, or in the state of Washington. And not so much with the salmon, but I'm not able to answer your question about the extirpated salmon runs and whether they are recolonizing with traditional genes or if they're new genes from strays. That's part of what we're trying to figure out with all of this attention that we've been giving it from both the perspective of scale samples, red counts, et cetera. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but it's all I have. The designation, by the way, of the wild and scenic is a state of Washington designation. I don't believe it's a federal designation.
Thanks, Paul. That's great.
This is Steve Gray with Washington Fish and Wildlife. Can you guys hear me okay?
If you could speak up a little, Steve, and it's great to make your acquaintance.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having this forum. I think it's great. But yeah, this point with the wild gene bank and the white salmon being designated as one is technically not correct. And a lot of you are probably familiar, and a lot of you were involved in the actual genetic gene bank designations in this strata. So technically in this strata, the Wind River is the gene bank. You're right, Paul, in such that this river system has been left alone to recolonize itself by strays. This system probably at one point in time did have both summers and winters in it, but there were no plants per se. So really a lot of the fisheries were supported by a lot of strays of summer steelhead coming into this basin in the lower 2 miles in the past. You're right, Paul, Omicus or Omicus. So upriver resident rainbows can give rise to anatomous steelhead in this basin. But I think we need to be very careful when we talk about genetic gene banks and calling this a genetic gene bank, because technically it is not. But you're right in that it does have some wild genetics in the system that we definitely want to be very conscientious about and handle with care. But technically, we want to eliminate some semantical confusion about calling it a gene bank when it really isn't in the designation of the process that we went through. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction, and let's talk more later, because I took that directly from the list of gene banks sent to me. So let's clear that up, and I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Other questions? Oh, someone wants me to elaborate on volunteer opportunities. David, you want like any volunteer opportunities, or are you talking about timing of volunteer opportunities? Because as you probably guess, I could go on and on about volunteer opportunities, but I don't want to waste your time. So I will share though that we do have right now in partnership with WDFW, we are doing coho red counts on the tributary, 3 tributaries of the White Salmon. And we are trying to get those done every 10 days or less. That's been the timing. So I have a calendar by which we are operating off of, and I like to send folks out in pairs, both just due to safety, both just water, height, bad weather, steep access, and other things. I like, for safety reasons, I really like to have pairs. So if you are interested at all in doing these coho red counts with us, please get in touch with me and I will chat with you and get you set up. Again, we do have a lot of different resources and training materials. And even if you've not done lots of red counts before, my agreement with WDFW and others was that we would always have someone that was seasoned and had experience. So we won't be sending you out on your own without any experience, because we want to make sure that we follow these protocols as closely as possible and provide the best possible data to WDFW. So, any other questions either for our wonderful guest speaker today, or for me for volunteer opportunities?
Hey, Jay Michelle.
Hi, Felton. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Felton, and he is one of our Shining Star red count folks that lives very close to the White Salmon.
Yeah, I'm inexperienced. I've done it once. But what I wanted to just point out for future, I guess for reference, if you want to read more about the science of it, the Osprey, people get the Osprey Journal. There's a picture. Top of my article got messed up, but this was from earlier in the fall, rewilding the white salmon. State of the river since dam removal. It was by Jeanette Burkhart, who's a biologist with the Yakima Nation. And it has some additional science citations in that article. And you might be able to find it through the Conservation Angler website. I think they've kind of taken over publishing of the Osprey now. But it's been out there for a long time and has a lot of good articles about salmon and steelhead in the Northwest and biology.
Great, Felton. Thank you very much. So the minimum
I was curious, this is
Mhm.
Kirk. I was curious, Paul, how'd the summer run look this year for the white salmon? Lots of fish show back up?
I have no idea, and I'm afraid no one does. Maybe the WDFW could give us more information on that, but I just find it amazing that billions of dollars have been spent on fish recovery as a result of all the dams on the mainstream of the Columbia, but that so little money has been spent thus far in the white salmon, of which I'm aware. And I do recognize that WDFW is doing some stuff. Yakima Nation has done an awful lot, but as far as returns, anybody that's on the call, feel free to tell me.
Well, I can chime in a little bit on that. Summer returns with their spawn timing is very difficult. A lot of the populations we monitor down here in Lower Columbia, 2 of which I directly oversee, which are on the East Fork Lewis River, which is a gene bank, as well as the Washougal River. We do some mark recite tagging for snorkel events. The tagging is done in July. When we find areas of congregations, we physically seine them, tag them, and release them, and then go back in September and do our mark recite snorkels. Red counts are really not efficable or not possible with you look at the timing and water conditions when they are spawning. So that's a difficult part there. And then also have to think about, again, what is the source of the summer population of the white salmon? When you think about the cold water refuge, how many different populations are swimming past the mouth of this river, which gets at, some of the genetic analysis, which really helps shed some light on, is this a localized broodstock, or is this, homogeneous strain of strays that are coming from Snake River, Upper Columbia, Yakima River, Titan, all these other tributaries. So summer population monitoring is very difficult for one, and then this is probably such a mixed bag in there, so to speak. It would definitely be curious to see some genetics and how they get broken out.
So is that pit array going to really help out with kind of what you got going on up there, or is that really not going to be sufficient for monitoring some of that?
My thoughts on that, Kirk, I think a pit array would be fantastic because most of the work done above Bonneville Dam is heavily relied upon for pit interrogation data. Most of what we do down below Bonneville doesn't do us any good because it's such a money consumption process and labor intense process to put the pit arrays in. And we don't have any of the main stem dams really to give us any outmigration data on for juvenile outmigration, let alone adult coming back in. So it's not been much of a forte for me to use that. It hasn't been beneficial for me, but in areas like the white salmon, by all means, I think it'd be extremely beneficial.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Hey, I'll add something else if anybody else knows, maybe.
Please.
The one very important function, I think, of the white salmon is that it's a important cold water refuge down in the Columbia. Paul was talking about how cool the water is. So there's a plume of cold water, during the summer that obviously salmon and steelhead will congregate in when the rest of the Columbia or most of the main stem Columbia is really too hot or not a optimal temperature, which, if you look out in the summer or early fall, I guess when the salmon fishing season is open, you'll see a lot of boats congregated at the mouth of the white salmon, mouth of the Klickitat, the Wind River, and state of Oregon has done work to restrict angling in some of those refuges, I guess most notably the mouth of the Deschutes. And I think there's some encouragement for Washington State to maybe do a little bit more refuge protection. Anybody know anything more about cold water refugia?
Good place to hang out.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions or comments? We've got a little more time, and I'd like to take advantage of having Paul here as someone who absolutely loves this river and is spending some valuable time with us today.
Well, since I talk too much, it is a great activity to do a float. There are 3 or at least 3 commercial operations, and you can float from up at BZ, below the BZ Falls, all the way down to the mouth of the Columbia and go over Hewsome Falls, which is about a 10 or 11 or 12 foot drop. It's one of the biggest rapids drop that you can do on a commercial raft trip. I've been told the only other one that's taller is in New Zealand.
Dang.
That's
But,
cool.
I've done it a few times and survived. But it's very, and Paul, I went with Paul and his wife Carol. We did with the Friends of the White Salmon, we did a float from where did we start, Paul? Did we start at Hewsum or did we start higher up?
We started at BZ, and Carol and I got out before going over Hewsum Falls. Others just put it down to age.
Yeah, but
But
it
a
was
lot
pretty,
of people went over.
yeah, I couldn't remember which trips I went over on or not, but that must have been one of them.
Yes.
But tell them about how scenic it was down the canyon and where the dam was, Paul.
It is fantastic, and I'll tell you, that river, which is pretty impressive, narrows down to about 12 feet in some places. It is amazing, and there is a place called Steelhead Falls, which is really more of a cataract than a straight drop falls, and you have to portage around that. But it is an amazing river down in the canyon below the old Condit Dam site, and including the old Condit Dam site. I highly recommend that you take a trip with one of the rafting companies, or if you are indeed good at it, to ride your own kayaks down. Just be careful.
Yeah, it's for experienced kayakers and rafters, and the companies I've been with are Zollers. Zollers is a second, third generation business doing float trips, and then Wet Planet is down. They both do a good job.
I think the river is best known to kayakers and rafters. Right now, the river is raging through there. I have never been there when there were not kayakers running that river, including times when there was a 100-foot tree in front of them and a 100-foot tree behind them, floating down the river, and me saying, "Hey, you got to be careful," and them saying, "Oh, we will be, we can handle it." I haven't heard of, but every now and then there is a serious problem with someone that is kayaking on the river, being a little too confident. If
Well,
there's nothing else,
I have
go
a
ahead.
question for Paul. This is Jennifer. Given how intense this system sounds, especially through the canyon, is there a lot of available spawning habitat up above the canyon in some of these smaller tributaries? Like, what's the potential of this area now that it's been opened up since Condit Dam came down and we've washed a lot of the sediments out of the system at this point?
I think that the answer is in part that we want to find that out. But we do know that the tributaries, Buck Creek, Mill Creek, Spring Creek, Rattlesnake Creek, all have good spawning habitat, and all of them are relatively pristine. The Spring Creek is so pristine, you practically can't get to it. There's so much vegetation around it. But I think it's safe to say that in the main stem of the river, there's not that much spawning habitat. I could be wrong, and I certainly call on others who are professionals to kind of fill that out if I've got it wrong.
Well, I would like to, first of all, Jennifer, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity in some of these tributaries higher up in the system. And so it'll be really interesting. I just haven't had an opportunity to look at what data already exists, since Condit has come out, and to see, where these animals are ending up and how well they're filling in some of this available habitat. So that's, I feel like it's an exciting time to be looking at this system in particular, because it seems like there's a lot of opportunity still available.
Well, with global warming and all of the subjects, the Deschutes River has smallmouth in the mouth of the river. the cold nature of this river in the summertime is what sort of turned me on in the first place. Only afterwards did I realize how much unsullied habitat there is both in the main stem and in the tribs. Zoller is just a great resource for the history. They've been running a rafting company on this river for 40 or 50 years. And brothers are a fishing guide. One of the brothers owns the rafting company. And a lot of my information comes from them.
Would like to, we are almost out of time, but I did want to mention a couple things. And again, Paul, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And thank you all for spending your lunch time with us. A gentleman on the call today, whose name is Ben, and I and another river steward named Dan Pierce did Spring Creek last Friday. And boy, howdy. I don't know if I've ever seen that many blackberries on a stream before ever, and I've fished for a really long time. So Spring Creek is available. The logging company that owns it did give us permits, so we have access to Spring Creek. We're working on different runs, reaches and runs on it. There is an ample opportunity for folks with some pink tape and some machetes to help make a couple trails so it's easier on folks as time goes by. And again, just to reiterate, if you are interested at all in any of these or other volunteer opportunities, please get a hold of me. And my information is in the chat. I'll put it in one more time. And you can also find myself and the rest of our conservation team, Kirk and Jennifer and Liz, on the Native Fish Society's website. And with that, I do not want to hold anyone up that needs to go. I know that we promised 45 minutes and we're at 46 minutes. Paul, I did want to thank you again. Thank you so much for taking the time today to share with us your passion and wonderful knowledge about that beautiful river. And
well, thank you. And, you know, I want to mention too, if you want to go look at the river, come up to Hewsome, go to Hewsome Falls, go upstream, and we're the first house on the right.
Perfect.
Stop by.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, folks, thanks so much for making this a very educational session, and appreciate it. And Steve, Gray, I really appreciate you being willing to chime in and help us out with some of the intricacies and the science. And I really appreciate your time today. It was good to put a face to a name.
Yeah, my pleasure. We'll talk more here real soon.
Perfect.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody. Have a good day.